Everyone, and welcome to the latest edition of my live streams that I do every other week, with a focus that changes between doing content UX audits and then going in depth on some subject of interest to the content marketing and SEO worlds. Today we are focusing on the latter, one of those two things. We are going to talk about Google's March 2024 core update. Before we do that, I'm just going to do my checks to make sure that this is actually streaming. While I do that, and it looks like it is working, so that's great. I'll remind you that we also have a chat. So this is streaming to a couple different places: LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, etc. If you reply to however it displays on the respective platform, then it will gather those replies in the comments for me to respond to. So I'll try to remember to, check that often. Before we start on the topic for today, just a reminder, for 2 weeks from now, which is May 29th, hard to believe, we're almost about halfway through the year. If you use this link right here, this blogsmith.tips minus the vowels /content UX, you'll be brought to a form where you can submit your content to be audited on one of these live content audits, content UX audits. And as a reminder, this is something that I used to do as a service for people. I've done it for hundreds of websites, and I've been able to kind of identify things that for some people it's hard to focus on those details or whatever because they maybe don't have that same background. I used to be a website designer. Now I'm fully in content. And just to say that I have, I think, kind of a unique perspective that is very in tune for very small things. So, trying to provide something useful to whoever submits themselves, because then the benefit to myself and the audience that watches these is that they get to benefit from seeing those insights as well. So let's go ahead and get started on our topic for today. I'm trying a fancy new in-camera overlay thing. I use Ecamm Live for my streaming, and then I tie it to Restream to go to the different platforms. So it's a little bit of an inception situation going on there. But I always hated how it would cut me out when I flipped to the browser, anything that I wanted to show. And as it turns out, it's a very easy fix. So here we are. So we're going to talk about the Google March 2024 core update. Lots of interesting things have been happening both in Google and also in the AI space, and that is some of the focus of this update, also known as the spam update. It is the latest in a line of helpful content updates, which is something that we also have a blog post about on the Blogsmith website. These updates, these helpful content updates, have been rolling out for a while now, a couple years. So this is the latest. I think we list 3 here or something like that. There were a couple that have happened since the initial one, and they have been sort of treated as these standalone updates. But as of this update, it's part of a bigger algorithm update. There was a specific thing I wanted to point out. Yeah, so Google merged the helpful content update with its usual core update, signaling an end to the series of standalone helpful content updates. So we'll get to what that means. Again, just wanted to share that we have another resource if you want to dig in even deeper as to what helpful content is. We will talk about that a little bit today. But again, if you want to dive in, you could do that. Taking one quick step back with this article. So our writer Amar wrote this, and what's really interesting about Amar is that he actually started as an editor at the Blogsmith, and then he recognized I guess a desire to want to kind of work on the other side. He obviously had a lot of experience working with the writers from the editor's perspective, and so now it's kind of come full circle where he's the writer working with editors, and he, because of having experience with these two sides of writing and editing, it has created some really cool articles, for us, for our clients. And so I would highly recommend, not only reading this article by him on the Blogsmith website, but some of the others that he's put together as well. We love to feature our writers' bylines on the Blogsmith blog. And so you can kind of get a taste for their different styles by, reading from the different authors. Anyway, so yeah, just like the TLDR of this Google update was that it was intended to address spam. So I'm going to show you something else that I would say is worth reading. Actually, this one first. Which is from Google. So this is, something that we consulted to put this resource together, something that we've consulted to understand the best approach to dealing with this algorithm update. And to kind of break it down, this was their goal. It was reducing low quality, unoriginal results. Makes sense. Their goal, and I think they hit it. I haven't researched in actuality how exact the numbers were, but their goal was to reduce unoriginal content in search by 40%. I don't know exactly how you measure that, but we'll take them at their word for now. The specifics that I'll draw your attention to here are the different sort of metrics or focuses really by which they judged, I guess, unhelpful content or low quality content, and ultimately spam in their words. So the first one was scaled content abuse, which is most of what our Blogsmith article talks about. And so it relates really to AI generated content. And there's some nuance there because I'll just flip really quick to this other useful useful resource from Google, which is their stance on AI generated content. So as you can see, this was published a year and plus ago. Some of it has changed slightly since they published it, but essentially I think the most important thing is right here. Is AI content against Google searches guidelines? It's not, full stop. So they give some specifics here as to how you can still create, helpful content or something that wouldn't be considered spam. I don't think they've necessarily used the word spam here, but this is another great resource for if you are using AI to generate content, whether it's one step or, the whole process. I would highly recommend reading through this if you haven't. But let's jump back to Google's own guidance about this specific spam update. So scaled content abuse essentially is, creating content purely through automation, and with the specific focus of trying to sort of game the search algorithms to be able to rank in relevant search, something that has little to no value. They say pages that pretend to have answers to popular searches but fail to deliver helpful content. And I will give you some examples of the sites that were penalized and why, so you can see what this looks like in actuality. So that's going to be the main thing that we focus on today. And again, AI generated content, like I just showed you, it's not against their policies, but it's if you're kind of blatant about it. And what's kind of interesting too is there were people on Twitter who were bragging about, some of their AI experiments and generating tons, thousands of pages of content and then talking about it on Twitter, and they were, bragging about their rankings and things like that. It's kind of funny. I forget the individual who I'm thinking of as I say this, but others in the space someone might come to mind. But this person who was bragging about these thousands of pages of AI generated content did get hit with a manual penalty along the lines of this Google spam update because they ran their mouth. Google actually didn't necessarily pick them up because of an algorithmic thing. It was because they had talked about it and bragged about it on Twitter, and then Google investigated further. So that's probably another good thing to keep in mind when we talk about the Google spam update, which is that it's a mix of both algorithmic signals that they're acting on, but also manual penalties. We'll dig into that a little bit more. I just want to get to the end of this list here of the different types of factors that you could be penalized for. So then we have this site reputation abuse situation here. And so it's so they talk about it in terms of a third party might be posting on your website low quality content. And so we had a client who had a situation like this where you can use their platform to generate, you can generate your own content, so user generated content, and then it gets published. You can share a link to it, for example. And in their case, at least at the time that we had last discussed this with them, they had indexed this content. So I guess it begs the question of like, if users are creating content and it's associated with your root domain, and they're creating it at such a scale that it would be very difficult to manually moderate and then no index things, then you probably should no index by default. That's like a huge, I'm kind of, generalizing here, but for them that would have probably been a better situation than what ended up actually happening. And I don't think that they've been hit with this penalty per se yet, but that doesn't mean that they couldn't, especially if, say for example, like a competitor saw that and then, reported them like a bounty hunter to Google. So just things to keep in mind. If you have an aspect of your tool or your website or something like that where users can generate content associated with your domain and then it gets indexed in search, that is a liability for you to get your whole website manually or perhaps automatically de-indexed per this update. And then the last one, which again is going to like affect a very specific group of people, is expired domain abuse. So I think we had this example on our article. But say, for example, someone in the affiliate space purchased a domain that a charity used to own, for example, and then started, posting a bunch of content that's unrelated there, for example. So basically, misleading users into thinking new content is part of the older site. You kind of have a different purpose than the people who originally made that site. This expired domain probably built, some sort of reputation around a certain industry, and then maybe you're posting from a totally different industry. So that's kind of what that's talking about. You'll know, if that's your goal. I think to summarize these three facets of what Google is targeting, it's kind of like if you go into content creation and running your website, and trying to benefit from SEO, it's really about like not trying to game the system in a way that negatively impacts users, right? It's not like putting your goals above the user's needs. And luckily at the Blogsmith, it has always been our approach to write for the reader first, in such a way that, it also like puts the client in this place, like putting them up on a pedestal, making them the star and things like that. But at the end of the day, I would say like the users are most important stakeholder, because if they don't like what they're reading, then they're never going to build a relationship with the client anyway. And that's, what inspired the Blogsmith writing style guide. This is another free resource on our website. This is the same style guide that we use for client projects, minus, some internal stuff that's redacted for specific clients and things like that. And it is also the foundation or backbone of my book, Writing for Humans and Robots. I would be remiss not to mention this in this discussion of writing, truly great content for readers. So that's my soapbox. I'll get off of it and we'll go back to the March 2024 core update. Okay, so yeah, there's some stuff in this article about, just core and algorithm updates in general that's interesting if that's of interest to you. I'm not going to spend too much more time on that. We talked a little bit about these new additions to Google's spam policies. I'm just trying to think if there's anything else I wanted to talk about with those. I think I mentioned that there's this algorithm update and the end results were a mix of automated systems and manual reviewers, and I'll give you some examples of the affected sites. So yeah, let's take a look at some of those affected sites, and then we'll probably wrap up from there. So here were a couple examples. A lot of SEOs have put together some teardowns of different like huge sites in terms of traffic and just like number of pages and things like that, and like what happened per this update. So Zach Johnson is one example. They publishing over 60,000 articles between September 2023 and March 2024, so over 300 pieces daily. I'm just going to go ahead and say it, like, when you scale up without a solid plan and without quality, you're just scaling up problems, because unfortunately now for Zach Johnson, like, because the site has gotten hit with this penalty, it's going to be a lot of work to undo all this and then to get re-indexed ultimately. There have been a lot of Twitterings too in the SEO community, and I'm not as in tune to, again, like, specific websites and, you know, how the rankings have changed, you know, like industry by industry or whatever, but it's a pretty commonly known fact that as a result of these Google helpful content updates, anyone who's been hit with a significant penalty has not recovered. And it looks like we have a question that came in. Thank you, Matthew. Okay, so Matthew says, what advice would you give to informational publishing companies that have been negatively affected by the updates? None of the legitimate sites have seen any recovery. So yeah, exactly what I was talking about. I mean, I think first of all, it's obviously pruning the content, right? Anything that was AI generated is probably not great if that's what got you hit by the penalty in the first place. And I'm just going to say, like, I don't have a lot of experience in dealing with penalty recovery, so I'm probably not the best person to talk to about this. But what I would say is, like, you have to essentially, like, TLDR is clean house, get rid of the trash, redirect like crazy, probably also start a new content strategy that involves quality, and it's only after you've cleaned your house and you've, like, proven yourself that I would attempt to, you know, try to, like, work through it with Google. And again, this is, like, my lack of experience in trying to get re-indexed after a manual penalty. I think you have the ability in Google Search Console to kind of, like, react to it, right, and, like, challenge it. So it's like, don't do that until the problem's gone. And yeah, I think like at the end of the day, what I'm trying to share with all of you here, and with this update and the world of AI generated content in general, is this is a warning. And we can look at some other examples too. So here's Freshers Live. This one seems to be a result of, honestly, just a bad user experience tied into, you know, the content itself. So that one's kind of a little bit outside of the scope of, like, the AI generated content, but I think this one's a better one. So Hook Audio claims to be a one-stop resource for joining the 3D audio revolution, but mostly covers unrelated topics like who is Audrey Meadows, you know, these, like, supposed celebrities. I'll be honest, I'm not familiar with these people, but doesn't have anything to do with 3D audio, right? So what I'm saying, I don't know if I got it all the way out before going to this example, is that AI generation, using it on your website is a little bit of a slippery slope, right? It might, you know, per Google's guidance, it might be okay, right? Like, it is okay in theory, but then we get into the specifics of what it has to look like, and that's where it gets a little bit more questionable. And so what I'm saying is this is a warning. And this is blatant, right? You know, clearly, if Hook Audio is about 3D audio, which I'm going to be honest, I don't know what that is either. But if that's what they're about and they're publishing so far outside of what their actual focus is, celebrity stats or something like that, famous people stats, I mean, that's just, like, I think Google could figure that one out pretty easily. And so that's what this update was. This was, like, the easy to figure out stuff. And now that they have these details, their algorithm's only going to get more and more fine-tuned. So while there is a lot of possibility in AI-generated content, there's also a lot of things that could go wrong that could literally de-index your website. I'm just going to say a couple other things about, like, AI content, for those of you who are concerned with that or, you know, want my insights on that. My perspective is that AI generated content, if you're going from like start to finish, one prompt or a few prompts or something like that, that's plagiarism. You might be a really great prompt writer, and good for you. But the content that you're prompting is not yours, and it's not being sourced in most cases when it comes to using AI. I've been recently playing around with like Perplexity, and I like that particular AI tool, whatever you want to call it, on the same, you could compare it to Claude or ChatGPT, but it has a different focus. But what it does is it pulls in sources. And so, like by default, ChatGPT, you could do it, but you kind of have to prompt with that in mind. But it's kind of like being a librarian, right? If you're like a great prompter, you still didn't invent the output. So in my opinion, AI generated content is plagiarism because it's trained on other people's work without giving proper credit to those people. And so that could also put you in legal trouble later on. But at the end of the day, I mean, whatever you publish, you should be able to stand behind. And I think if you are doing a one prompt AI generated article, like I'm sure this website did, right? Like I'm sure maybe this one, maybe not, but I'm sure, Zach Johnson did. Then that's going to get you in trouble, not only with Google, but possibly with the legal system. I've already said it's a lot of work to fight a manual penalty. I don't know how much work it is because I haven't had to do that, but I know that it's a lot. And then I think the last thing that I'll say on this too is we're working on a project with a client right now that's very focused on EEAT. So basically like weaving in the insights of subject matter experts, leveraging first person perspectives and experiences. And I mean, I think it's fair to say like what we're doing right now is rewriting a bunch of past content that has ranked well to make it rank better moving forward. What I want to say is I think it's fair to assume that this is the future of search right now. None of us know exactly what search is going to look like in a couple months, in a year, in 5 years. It's going to look a lot different for sure. I think that's the only thing that we can say definitively. But I think it's fair to say that right now, this is something that stands out amongst the AI, whatever. It's people's human experiences, and it's creating content that is new because it comes from people's experiences, and it, bolsters perhaps existing content or brand new content, whatever it might be. And AI can't touch that, right? They can repurpose what already exists, but they can't add that new flavor. And it's that experience that I think still compels us to read print journalism, for example, right? Even though print is in many ways, like a dying industry, in terms of printing specifically, not necessarily the online aspect of it. But like that's what people want to read, and that's something that I don't think AI can touch because it doesn't have a unique human perspective and it doesn't have human experience either. And so I guess to just kind of like tie a bow on this discussion, be careful what you do with AI. It's not that it doesn't work, but it has some potentially very bad negative things that could happen. So be careful. But also, like, be thoughtful. If you are using AI, it shouldn't be like you generate the whole article, you don't read it, and you publish it. You should make sure that it's relevant to what you actually do on your website. And, ideally, I think there is a space for you to leverage AI, but also leverage human insights, right? And so it's finding that blend. So anyway, this spam update was a warning. Heed it how you will. Best of luck to all of us. And to end what we're talking about today, a reminder to submit your content for the live content UX audit that's going to happen 2 weeks from now. So that's all I got. I don't see any further questions. I hope this was useful to you. If you ever have any topics that you want to dive into in more detail, I'm always happy to do that too. I love, getting feedback and taking suggestions. So let me know, and have a beautiful rest